one base that you started out with, and then take it further. The same eye gaze technology which can help control equipment can now also be used, for example, in the medical space to diagnose people on the autism spectrum. Or you can take it to a retailer and say, we always have in the retail, right, how many, or marketing or advertising.
You've of course lived in US, you've lived for 9 years in Africa, and now you've come to India. And I'm sure US was like a dreamland for it.
My first week here, and he is an example of the openness and the warmth that we felt, my wife and I, since we moved here. We just got here in August. So I really appreciate being included. Africa, so we just moved from Kenya. I had been the New York Times bureau chief in East Africa for 11 years, and we just moved continents to here, to Delhi, a few months ago. Africa's a very hard place to be disabled. There's almost no infrastructure to help somebody who's in a wheelchair or has a hearing disability. I did a big story a few years ago about albinos, people who suffer from albinism. And equatorial Africa is the worst place in the world to be an albino because your skin gets seared by the most powerful rays of the sun. And on top of that, albinos were being hunted down by people who believe that their body parts would bring them good luck. Has anybody heard this story before? And so as a journalist, we're not supposed to do pieces that just reinforce stereotypes. This was really happening. And there was very little support and help for these albinos who were already suffering and then were facing this wave of killings. And I wrote about these little kids who had been hunted down by people and murdered and then destroyed and sold to pieces. So it's just an example that these societies are on a continuum of opening up. It's like going in one direction. I see it. Maybe that's too optimistic. But in the United States, first women got the right to vote, then blacks got the right to vote. Then it opened up to diversity issues, to disabled people. Now the gay rights and the LGBT movement is like the big battle. Transgender, and so I see it as opening up. But the United States has
Donald Trump got Twitter.
What's that?
Then Donald Trump got a Twitter account.
But I see it's a little easier in a place where it's been codified. So the United States has all the rights of anybody else, no matter what. I think India's constitution is very progressive. Money to pay for elevators or lifts or like the buses. I see these big buses cruising around in Delhi. And I started driving my second night here. I said, I have to get over the fear of driving. Let me just jump out there. The roundabouts are insane, by the way. But you see these huge buses flying at you. And I haven't seen, any of these buses here that,
So, and I'm sure you must have assumed that Indian disability rights movement was also progressing at that time. So how disappointed were you on coming back to India, and what do you think that needs to change in that sense?
I didn't set up a museum.
Documented in that sense?
It's not documented. In fact, that's one of the things I would love to work with you, curate an exhibition on the access, demand for access, because we need to look at the struggle for access, demand for access in the US, look at it through the prism of civil rights movement. Because many of the accessibility rights in the US came out of the civil rights movement, the expansion of the definition of civil rights, right? So I worked on the exhibition. Much of East Coast and the West Coast of the United States has been very well documented in the academia and also in the museum space, but not so much in the museum space. And wanted to treat it as a civil rights movement. So I did about 24 oral history interviews with them. Looking at the way the design of a wheelchair has changed in the last 100 years, will tell you the story of access, will tell you the story of prejudice. Looking at the largest collection of hearing aid devices also tells you a story of Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri had action to disability rights, and I worked on it for about 1.5 years, and it just changed my life. It changed the ways I look at world, look at societies, and it also pushed you to question things. And sure, I I was born and raised in India, so there was no surprise about the status here. The disability rights movement in India is where probably the United States was in the 60s. In the 60s and the 70s, the West Coast pioneered a movement called the Independent Living Movement, started in California, and it was successful because they tailored the movement and its slogans around the most cherished and quintessential American value, which is independence. And they said, this is not a movement for charity, for pity, for subsidies, for welfare policies. It is a movement for independence. We want to declare independence. We do not want to be dependent. And that's one of
mainstream workforces and teams. I think most of the hiring happens out of tokenism or sympathy, and I think that needs to change. I think most companies that I've spoken at or constantly visit to speak about sensitization and inclusive workforces always about what can we do to kind of make them feel safe and make them feel okay. And I think it comes from a place of sympathy, and I think that should change. I think they come with their own skills and talents, and I think to integrate them, to integrate us into mainstream workforces is very important. I think when people hire, they should hire based on what I'm good at, not because of my gender and it makes them look good. Also, I think in the places that I've worked in many newspapers. I've started off as a reporter and went on to being the senior editor of multiple newspapers, and even with the BBC in London. But I think initially everybody judged me based on my gender, and I think a lot of stuff was done to kind of there would be hushed whispers. People would walk away from me when I walked into a canteen. People would have the most harsh, cruel, baseless things to say about me. But if you're good at your work and you're competitive and you deliver, and I think that's what people judge you on eventually, and I was bloody damn good at it. You know, if somebody stepped on my toe once, I would step on their toes 10 times because I'd be good at my work. I think that's the most important thing. I think I'm there because of the virtue of my work, and judge me on the basis of that. So whenever people ask me provoking questions, when people about how I do it, they wouldn't do that to their female colleagues. They wouldn't do that to their sisters or their mothers or people at home. They felt it was okay to do it to me at work because I was transgender. So I had to change the narrative and say, you know what, there are boundaries, there are standards. So it was tough, but I think I did it.
Community, right? It's a hidden diversity to a large extent where corporates in India don't talk about this subject. First thing I think we should do is talk about it more, right? And a lot of companies don't even, though claiming to be equal opportunity employers, don't have the protection for the community, because for all you know, all LGBT people are already there in most workforces, right? It's not like, of course, there is a marginalized transgender community who do not get the opportunities that they
Can I ask you a
deserve.
specific question? And what should a corporate do to be more sensitive to the LGBT community? Can you give us a checklist?
So the checklist is, I mean, it's not like a magic checklist, I would say, but to start with, how do you show that you are inclusive, right? You need to get the protections right first. So make sure that your policies protect people on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, right? Because today, so I think the first thing required is for the company to have the infrastructure in place, the policies in place, which make people at least, at one level saying, okay, if I come out and declare my status, then I would be protected. The next thing is, of course, having gender-neutral policies. Your leave policies should not discriminate people on the basis of, who your partner is. Things like gender cleansing the policies in general, like even the sexual harassment policy that, Apsara was referring to a few instances. A lot of sexual harassment policies in India are probably drafted from the government rules of sexual harassment, and they're very gender coded. It's always he and she. So, but it should ideally be identity or sexual orientation or the way I express myself. I think that's where it impacts me, right? So, how is a company about tokenism? It's not about, giving out any special benefits. It's an equal benefit. Having gender-neutral restroom or having a restroom for persons with disabilities.
I have a question for you, so can we just
Go ahead.
To everybody on the panel, I think we're talking about how companies should hire more and what kind of policies they should be. But I think we need to talk more about how do we advance LGBT members or people from different as well. And top level corporate CEOs ask me, what about marriage? I'm not here to talk about marriage. What about work? What about becoming the CEO? What about me being in your place? I think that's the kind of dialogue we need to have in terms of upscaling your skills and also about people understanding the gender dialogue and the gender debate to go away from just acceptance and tolerance.
Correct. Sanjay, would you like to? And can I add to that?
Yes, there are policies, there are rules and regulations, but it is largely an HR agenda, which is falling somewhere as a CSR activity, right? Again, the intent is we are doing it, either we will be quoted in media or we will come out to be appearing as an equal opportunity employer and not necessarily looking at the entire stuff as something which can contribute to innovation, growth, profit, etc. to an organization. Because we don't have to say it again and again that yes, a diverse culture really brings in. Right? For example, the region that I manage, I come across people with different, of gender or orientation or color, creed, etc. And my experience has said that whenever I have a good mix, the outcome is really, really positive, right? So we have been talking about a CEO becoming a chief marketing officer. He's becoming a chief people officer. Why can't he become a chief diversity officer? Because there are these patterns of success, patterns of conduct, patterns of education, etc. And we are expected to follow that pattern right from our childhood, right? Do this way, do this way. This is the correct because shift big societal changes because organizations are what? They are the micro representation of society. You can hardly do anything. What you get is what the way societies and mindsets and thinkings are. And you expect that. It's like same thing. You send a child to school and expect school to do everything. Whereby in the family, the orientation is completely different. So how can you blame a school? Right? So I think we need to look at from that perspective if we really want to make a meaningful difference because the takeaways are huge in terms of peace, prosperity, growth, innovation.
Group that was fighting for its rights in my lifetime and faster progress. If you look at like this, the Harvey Weinstein sexual harassment story that's just blown up in the United States, it shows that women are still greatly discriminated against, and more than discrimination, harassed and abused in the workplace. Look at, and again, I have like an American lens on this, but if you look at race issues in the United States, they're still so raw and troubling. And within, 10 or 15 years, it's like the country has totally changed its opinion, the mainstream on LGBT issues. I was in New York City this summer and caught the Gay Pride Parade, which is enormous. It shuts down Manhattan for the day, and there's millions of people that go. And what struck me was the corporate sponsorship. That all the biggest companies in the country, in churches, all these groups, and serious players on the landscape that would have never been that out front on gay issues, 10 years ago. And we've lived outside the States for a decade, so I saw it very dramatically because I hadn't been living there for a long time. But even these measures in all the different states to legalize gay marriage, that's changed so fast. If you did a poll 20 years ago in the United States and said, should two people who are gay be allowed to be married and get all the rights of the state, most people would say really successful. And I would love, I was just thinking of, you guys have some answers. I would love to know, what other groups fighting for their rights could take away from that.
Just to build on that, and just an observation, I may be totally off. I think this particular in the right places who can really lead the movement, which when you look at other diverse communities, I think that's where a little bit of vacuum.
Or maybe gay people are just smarter.
Maybe the emotional approach is the entry point, but rational approach is what is going to take you a long way. So we need to start looking at inclusion and acceptance from different lenses. And I think part of the reason the LGBT community have found this kind of success in such a short period is
India can do some more people with disabilities.
change the language. Most important is changing the language. The language, or for 70 years in India, language has been dominated by one of pity and prejudice and charity. I think we need to change that, we need to fix it. We need to fix how we describe the community, this whole differently abled and challenged and all that. We need to jettison those, because those come from a paternalistic state attitude. You need to, and again, the young, I think it's, I don't want to be seditious, but I think it's a ridiculous word. It's a very patronizing words approach. So yeah, media will, the first and most important step is to change the language. And once you change the language, prejudices change, the way the perceptions change, everything. Media has a great power to change perceptions. The second thing is, in India today, politically, we are at a very important time. Yes, this government, what happened to that, but it was the first time it was done. See, what I'm seeing in society and politics today is the veneration of the military. You know, the army worship that's demanded of you. How can you turn that into a strategy? There are many army veterans who have disabilities.
Is something that possible in a country like India?
Well, I was thinking of that when you were saying there wasn't anything that was like really visibly angry from the disability side, the way some of these women's rights movements have been. And I think it is being totally blind and try to hit each other. And yeah, at one point when I was writing the story, these guys were back to back, like punching because they couldn't see each other. But there was something very inspiring about what this guy was trying to overcome. And there's
Jayalalitha, a day before I met her, said, no, I cannot meet her because I was transgender. And in the history of the AIADMK, Mr. MGR or Madam Jayalalitha had never met a transgender woman and inducted her into the party. It was basically you have to give them a missed call and they'll send the card home. You can join the party that way. And I said, no, I'm not interested in joining the party that way. But I think Sashikala ma'am and Jayalalitha ma'am, I think, had a discussion, called me over and made me join the party in front of more than, I think, 20 lakh people. And I think for me that is inclusion. I think for me that is, we're the third largest party in parliament. And to make me the national spokesperson of the party and sitting and fighting with Arnav and Rajdeep and Barkaz, and it's a huge high. I'm 32 years old, and I think for me to be given that position of responsibility by Jayalalitha, I think that is leadership. I think to take that risk, to coach you to be the person they want you to be, and also exploit your innate skills, I think is amazing. And not once have they ever used the word transgender, either in Tamil, English or Hindi. They've always told, in fact, the party has called news channels and said, please don't say transgender activist, just say national spokesperson. So I think it's amazing that I worked under her, and I do miss her. But your next question was, you had a second part to the question.
Or no reservation?
I think we should be 99% women in parliament. I think the world will be a much better place. But I genuinely feel, I think, in the day and age that we live in today, I think women
effectively. So I think from a playing field, there are quite great opportunities, which I would say not so visibly available 6 to 8 years back, but now it is there. It is for women now to really come out, make their stay and say, yes, this is what we are going to do. And if it matters of changing a little bit of
And a lot of organizations have started identifying where are these dropouts happening, right? The assumption was a lot of women drop out of just after maternity, but a lot has been done around this space where, how do you get women easy access to childcare within the company? Now we have the Maternity Amendment Act, which has enforced that in certain ways, but we also have seen career dropouts at later stage. For example, we've had senior executive, at that stage, we've had dropouts because some women feel that they have to be there when their children reach a 10th standard, that the whole clearing board exam and things like that. So what we found is when at the early stages of the career, there needs to be something called as a more focused career identity development among women. So there are programs that we've made which enforces that career identity very strongly. What is career identity? It is for a person to believe that, this is what I want to be. There is a sort of a strong feeling that they have to give importance to the career and work on it regardless of the life stages that they go through, right? And we found that if you do that early on, Um, for example, it's probably at the stage where the woman is just going to probably get married. At that stage, if you put in a stronger career identity focus, then you're basically telling a person that they have the control to do what they want, right? And giving them the means of how they work their life around their career. And if you do that,
I don't want to speak for women, obviously, but and there's a relationship between the two. There's a relationship between the two, but I didn't look at it like that until somewhat recently, where I actually thought, okay, there's a bigger struggle of women in the workplace even today. That's, I guess, my point. And we're seeing that with this whole sexual harassment explosion. I mean, even in these places of the most liberal institutions in the United States, these big media organizations or people on the far left, that's where all this stuff is happening.
We only have around 5 minutes left, so are there any questions in the audience? By the way, she is India's Miss Wheelchair this year.
Yeah, perfect. So, there's this one thing that I want to ask and just talk about, that when you talk about equality, don't you think, be it gender equality, be it diversity, it should be basically about sensitization more at the basic areas, maybe school, maybe your corporate culture, rather than just talking about it. Of course, there is a lack of confidence, but why is it? Be it female, be it anybody, why is it? It is because it has been going through centuries
of the history of movements. So basically, now what we have in terms of books, in terms of narratives, that you talk about religious books or
ways of changing the lens or shifting the lens almost. So just shifting the narratives like that. But also the other important thing of chronicling a movement is also to collect, to very studiously collect every protest, artifacts around protests, oral histories around protests, because these belong in university archives. Who are the people who have conducted important work in the movement, chronicle their lives, their stories, make it part of the curriculum, university and school curriculum. This is how you build a narrative. And this is how you build a narrative of human rights and also a sense of history. And I don't look at history as a nostalgic engagement with the past. I look at it as something I'm creating right now. So, each one of us who are working in the community should look at ourselves as history makers, so that, we kind of influence the world that is inherited later. So chronicling our lives, your lives, the work you're doing from a historical, academic perspective becomes imperative.
I'd like to add one more point. I think from the disability community, we all should call out patronizing a little loudly, right? A lot of times we allow people to patronize and we remain silent if they do it.
Thank you. I have so many questions. I have so many more questions, but I'm so
our panel partner Monster, our government partner Inclusive India Campaign, partners Eastern Hotels and Nipman Fastener Industries, our bronze partner IBM, and our awards tabulator ENY. Once told me when he was a little boy, he said, "It's science which will change my life, not medicine." As you move along and hear about from the winners, you will realize what he said was the golden truth. Over to Nipman.
मैम थोड़ा पीछे जी मैम मैम ऐसे नहीं आएगा कुछ भी आपका राउंडिंग में रहेंगे तो मैम फ्रंट पे हो जाइए सामने आप ऐसा आएगा नहीं मैम मैम लुक फ्रंट
And there are two entrepreneurs here who are going to eventually win the award. I'd like to start with the AV for the first category. Because there's no form of transport. And especially what Easy Move has done is that they're also providing transport to a lot of elderly people, where they realize that they are a part of the target audience. We also have a launch of a small book. Thank you.
And effectively, I think 15 years, because I remember, I think it was 2005 or 6, no, it was 6 or 7, when Nipman, who was still a student of Delhi School of Economics, was doing his MA previous, and I was heading ICRIA, a think tank, the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, which is here in the Habitat Center. He came to see me, and I actually didn't know who Nipman Mehrotra was. So when he came into my office and I saw him, I was a little taken aback, because I thought this was a Delhi School of Economics student an MA previous student coming to meet me. And when I saw him, I said, "What are you wanting from us?" And he said, "I want to do an internship and I want to be associated with ICRIER." And with God's grace, I did not take, I think Nipun will testify to that.
Thank you guys, bye.
Thank you. So this is me, Shubham. Guitar will be played with by me only, and here's my friend Sagar, who is on the flute as well. So we've prepared a medley, a mixture of 4 or 5 songs. I hope you all will enjoy this.